Hi. Okay, so hi, I'm Amy. I am the Teen Services Librarian at Sulzer Regional Library, and I take care of the fish. I basically wanted to do an update video on, it's been almost 2 years since I put Obie's Pond together, and I wanted to just sort of follow up and say this is where it currently is at, and the current state of the pond and some of the fish. So mostly I wanted to kind of look over the older video and sort of talk about some of the things that happened in there and then compare it to what is going on now. So in the original video, and I'll turn this down.
Services librarian at Sulzer Regional Library.
Yeah, this tank here actually has been doing really well. There's a lot of fish. Yeah, and I talked about Obie when he was a baby. He's huge now. He is gigantic. So yeah, originally when I first made this pond, if you haven't seen the original video, I took a 150 gallon stock tank that you can get for relatively cheap compared to a glass aquarium of that similar size. And I built a frame around it, and yeah, you can see how big it is. And I've gotten comments about Goldfish could do even bigger, of course. 1,000 gallons would be probably great for if you have several goldfish. And ultimately, I'm hoping to upgrade Obie to a 300 gallon pond, but that's sort of a little more long term. But I think that would be the best size, especially if you have multiple goldfish. I ended up building a miniature version of this for Angelo, one of the goldfish who I tried to put with Obie and Jonathan, and he didn't work out. And so I ended up having to sort of quickly makeshift a 55 gallon tank for him to stay in temporarily. And he's ultimately going to get a bigger tank as well. Same thing with Jonathan and his two new roommates. So everything actually with this part has been fine. Just currently I haven't had any issues with the frame. When I sealed it, nothing, no mold or anything like that has shown up. Yeah, everything actually has been fine with this. You can actually see in here, this is the pump I have. This is the FX4. This is what I use to, it's the major filter for Obie's Pond. I also have a very large sponge filter in there as well. But this guy does most of the work. And I'll talk about that later when I talk about some issues that I've had with this pond over the last couple of years. I'm actually really glad that I put this pond liner in my tank. There was one time when I was changing the water and I looked away for just a little bit helping some of the patrons, and then I noticed looking back, I was like, oh, it's overflowing, and the water was spilling right out of the stock tank into the liner, which was great, exactly what I intended it to do. Obie hilariously was trying also to get out of the pond, which was goofy, but I managed to stop it in time and only maybe a couple gallons got out. But I was like, I am so glad I put this pond liner as a safety around the pond itself, as a way to catch any water that accidentally gets out. This has been super helpful. I originally got this because I was afraid that where the pump was, I put silicone around it, but I was afraid there was going to be a leak and it might fall into the ground, or just leak out. So that's originally why I put this pond liner, but it actually has been very good as just a fail-safe in case you overflow the pond. So I'm really glad I did that. This frame up here that holds the light, I've got vines and everything growing up it now, and it's really grown out, especially with these this back frame here, which is like a willow sort of accordion style. My brain isn't working right now, but trellis, yeah, that goes up along the back. Yeah, in this part here, I just had makeshift put some foam in that was just held together with liquid nails, and I knew it wasn't going to be super sturdy, but but I also wanted to have it have gaps so that when it did overflow, it would go from this water from the main tank and into the pond liner that was around it, which is exactly what it did. But this was only designed to just kind of hold a little bit of pea pebbles that weren't very heavy, very thin layer, which I'm now actually started growing succulents along. I put some succulent soil, which is really light, along this, and put little succulents there, which has actually been really cute. And then yeah, there's light. I ended up actually getting a second light. This one was only kind of above the pond, and the umbrella palms really grew into that light to the point that I had to keep trimming them because they would just go right into it and get burned. I bought another grow lamp, which is just a bulb, and it's hanging from another part of the tank just to sort of give more light to the space. Oh yeah, and this waterfall, this has actually been the biggest problem I've had. And it's not because of like the design or anything here, but because the pump originally, when I created this waterfall, it was a pump that went into the back of it. But 3 pumps I went through and they all broke, and I'm sure it's because they were relatively cheap, but I wasn't expecting them to constantly keep breaking. The other issue was Jonathan. Jonathan, for some reason, cannot be around water pumps, and every time I would put in a new pump or the old pump would start to break, he would just start freaking out and start having panic attacks and would like gasp at the surface. And it took me forever to even realize, if you've seen some of the videos, it took me a while to even realize that was the problem, that it was just water pumps. So, oh my gosh, that was such a pain. And yeah, so I ended up giving up on all that, and I've got really bad, I'm trying to like get good footage to show people like what I'm talking about. But what I ended up doing was taking the FX filter, and the intake is in the water, but the outtake is, it basically goes into the top of the waterfall, and it fills up the waterfall and then goes through it. Because I couldn't really get, like, not have something going to the waterfall because the plants are growing out of the waterfall, especially the umbrella palm. So if I don't have water coursing through it, it's just going to kill the plants. So I didn't want to, like, not have a pump or not have something going into it. I'm kind of afraid that it's going to kill the FX filter, like, over a long time because it's basically I'm going to pump a little bit higher than normal, but we'll see. It's not really like having to go through anything, so it just kind of goes into the waterfall. But that's been one of my bigger issues. The other issue I've had is the lily pads. I tried like 4 times to grow lily pads in this pond, and every single time it has never worked. Yeah, you can see them. So these lily pads, I tried putting it in terracotta pots. I tried putting it in those things that you wrap around it, like the cloth that had the pond soil in it, and that was growing. Obi just hates lily pads, I guess. Every time it would grow a new shoot, he would just eat it. And it was just, I was like, I give up. Right now I'm trying Valsneria, and I'm saying that wrong, I'm sure. And I'm trying to put that into the cloth one and see if that'll work, because otherwise he usually digs those up. But he doesn't usually eat those leaves, so I'm hoping that might work. The only plant I've ever successfully been able to keep long-term in this pond is the Anubias, the hornwort, and guppy grass. Everything else he pretty much will just devour. Also, I don't think you can see in this picture, it's not in this one now, but I'll link some footage of it. But I've got a terracotta pot that's floating up, and it's hooked onto the tank, and that has cryptocorn in it. And it's the dark kind, the brown one. And that one actually does really well as long as I have it really close to the surface of the water, so Obi can't quite get in it. He has turned sideways and tried to like get in there, which is hilarious, but he hasn't been able to like kill it, so that's actually been pretty good. Most of the plants, like in this picture here, have been the most successful, or the ones where it's just roots growing in there or the pots in the water. Actually trying to grow the plants underwater is usually a disaster with goldfish, which I knew, and I was going to test out different things, but as you see, like some of them have had, you know, a little bit more success and some haven't, but yeah, these are nice. Jonathan started growing warts, and at first it was real weird, and we were trying to figure out like, what is it? Why is he growing these like weird growths on his side? And so I even called a vet, and he was like, it's probably papilloma, it's probably like a wart, but we're not, you know, we could cut it off and be sure. And I was like, I'm good. It was $70 just to even talk to the guy on the phone about it. So I was like, I'm like, if it causes a problem, then I might like, you know, look into it. But the more I did research on it, I was like, oh, this is actually pretty common for goldfish to get kind of warts like this, and it's super contagious. Once someone gets it, pretty much it's gonna like go to everybody. And so I was a little worried, like, you know, about the other fish getting it, and then Obi got it. He scratched himself, and basically everywhere where he had scratched himself, which he does often, would grow like a little wart there. And so if you ever see in any of the more recent footage that Obi's got these like little growths on him, it's the warts. It's not as bad as Jonathan. Jonathan's very warty right now, which is unfortunate. Yeah. So yeah, you can see right here, he's got warts on his head, and he's got these little warts here, and there's that big one that's in the back there. Sadly, he's also got a little bit of warts growing in his gills, and it's I'm wondering too if that's part of the reason why he was having issues with the water pumps and breathing and stuff, and would he have these like panic attacks, is that the warts are growing. He also, the shape of his gills are kind of concave, like they sink in instead of like normal where they kind of like go like this. And I think that's also part of the problem why he has trouble breathing, because I noticed one time he was having a really bad panic attack, which is the reason why he's at home with me right now, is because Obi was beating up on him, and the old pump was, or this newer pump I bought was dying, and I was trying to replace it with this older pump, and Jonathan would just sit at the bottom of the tank and you need grasp for air, and it was just really like stressful for him. And I noticed too when I took him out and put him in a quarantine tub is that only one of his gills was working. Like the other one was just not actually moving enough for him to get like oxygen into it. And so I'm like, okay, I think he's got like his deformities plus the warts is not helping, and that he needs to be basically separated from Obi because Obi's being a bit too mean and aggressive against him. So Jonathan is now at home with my 2 Shibunkin goldfish, and that's where he is at right now. And he's been actually doing much better. Every now and then he'll have a little bit of issues breathing, but he's doing a lot better than he was before. Unfortunately, the warts are growing, so I'm a little worried about that. But everything I've looked up on like the warts with goldfish is there's really nothing you can do. It's a virus. It's not anything you can treat, so it's unfortunate. So yeah. So that's the update. Angelo's doing fine too. Occasionally he has his like, he's also I think growing warts, but they're like really small and they fall off. His is really weird, so I don't want to actually put him with anybody else because I'm afraid he's gonna like give that to other fish too. I've sadly put Jonathan with my Shibunkin, which means that the Shibunkin will probably catch it, which makes me sad, but it's better for Jonathan to have some place that he feels, because I notice when he's alone, he's very, very stressed, and he seems to do better with other goldfish. And so I wanted to put him in a tank with some other fish that weren't as aggressive, and Angelo was too mean to Jonathan to put him with him. So that's why he's with the Shibunkin, even though they'll likely get warts, which is sad, but it do. So if you have any questions about certain plants that I have in here, or certain plants that do really well, at home I've been growing Monstera out of my pond, and it's actually been doing really, really well. So I'm trying to get some cuttings of that Monstera and putting it into this pond with Obi, because I think it'll also do really well, and maybe cut back on the umbrella palm, because the umbrella palm's leaves had turned all brown and like spotted, and I'm gonna probably assume that has to do with either a lack of a certain nutrient, which I've been adding like potassium and other kinds of like fertilizers into the tank, but I haven't noticed that anything has really helped that. And I'm wondering if it's just a reaction to me putting salt in the water whenever I was trying to treat Obi for when they first started getting warts. I wasn't sure what it was, and I was told like try salt, and so I added pond salt to the tank, just a small amount, which said it was okay for plants, and all the other plants seemed to be fine, but the umbrella palm started to get like the black spots, so I think it just reacted to the salt. So yeah, if there's anything, any questions that you all have about the plants or about like the status of the water, so I've been monitoring Obi's water as well as my other tanks ever since I started like putting them together and all that. And funny enough, Obi's actually had one of the more successful tanks. I only have to change the water like maybe once or twice a month. The nitrates have actually stayed really low. Obviously no ammonia, no nitrites, and the pH has stayed very stable. But the nitrates, when there was him and Jonathan, they would go up a little bit, but I rarely ever saw it hit 40 parts per million. It always stayed around about 20, which was really good. And because when you have plants, like you want to have it to be relatively low, but when you have plants, you do want a little bit of nitrates. I wouldn't say like 50 or even 40 is kind of pushing it, but 20 is actually like a great place to stay at if you can, if not a little bit lower. But you don't want it to be straight zero, because the plants are going to be really upset if it's like no nitrates at all. And that's why you would add fertilizer if it was below that, and then you would add less fertilizer if it was above it. But I have noticed that some of the plants' leaves would be like changing colors, so I tried adding just straight potassium and stuff like that it might be low on, because I knew it wouldn't be nitrates that it would be low on. So yeah, so it's actually been really good. The water's been great. Like I said, I usually do about a 30% water change every month, if not twice a month if I notice the nitrates going up. I usually test nitrates every couple weeks. in all my tanks just to make sure everybody's like stable. So, and of course I can't forget about Caviar, Obi and Jonathan's little baby. So about a year in after I created the pond, Obi and Jonathan turned out weren't two girls as I had assumed, but was a boy and a girl, and they started spawning, and there was behavior leading up to it that I was like, this looks like spawning behavior. And then out of nowhere, I hear a loud splash, and then there's eggs all over the tank and on the waterfall and out on the leaves. That was insane. And it smelled so bad. Nobody tells you like it stinks whenever they start spawning. So it was this fishy smell, and I was like, oh my goodness. So I had to clean up a lot of it. And at some point, I had cleaned out their sponge filter, and I guess an egg had gotten off of the sponge filter and gotten into the cleanup bucket where I store the water before I transfer it over to the plants and stuff around the space. And I was going to pull out some of the excess water, and I usually take it into a pitcher because there's shrimp and snails that live in this tub. And I was just making sure I wasn't picking up any shrimp or snails. And I noticed there was a baby fish, and I was like, oh, how did you get in here? This isn't where you're supposed to be. So, I mean, it was microscopic. It was like little bitty baby. And so I was like, I don't know what kind of fish you are, because I have Harlequin rasboras and other fish that could potentially this be a baby of. So I put it in one of the hospital tanks just to see if it would grow out, and there's some baby platies in there. And as the baby grew, I realized, yeah, this is a goldfish. And so we named the baby Caviar because Obi had eaten most of the other eggs, which we thought was apt. And little Caviar kept growing and growing and growing, and that's last video I posted was Caviar swimming underwater with his two platy friends. It's the same two he grew up with. The heater had broken that hospital tank, and the platies had basically grown up in room temperature water. This is the only reason why they've been kept together. And whenever I tried to take the baby goldfish out and put him by himself, he was really like stressed out. And so I added those platies in there with him just because I was like, I have so many platies, may as well. And they seemed to be getting along just fine, and that really like put down the stress on Caviar. And it also helps Caviar like kind of socialize with other fish. Of course, I'm not going to keep Caviar with the platies long term. Those are tropical fish. Goldfish are not. They like colder water. The temperature of that tank is typically around 71, so it's kind of okay for both of them. It's a little on the cool side for like platies, but they can usually go down a little low. So ultimately I'm going to take them out, mostly because when a goldfish gets big, it eats anything that can fit in its mouth, and it will definitely eat the platies. So they're not going to stay together for very much longer. Little Caviar is now 8 months old. He's a little cutie. He's growing huge. And soon I'm going to probably take him home and put him with my other fish, the shabunkins, and Jonathan. But I'm still trying to decide because I don't want him to get bullied, because he is considerably smaller than the rest of my goldfish. So I want to make sure that he's in a spot where he doesn't feel like he has to really compete for food and then die from that. So yeah, that's the update on little Caviar. And again, I always start a sentence and never finish a sentence. If you have any questions about any of the tank setup or the fish or water quality or how I test things or just what my day-to-day looks like whenever I'm taking care of these fish, feel free to drop a comment in the comment section, and I will hopefully reply to it. All right, thanks.